So Shabbat Shalom and Moedim L'Simcha. How's everybody doing? Good? It's a little, sometimes it feels hard when there's no Kabbalat Shabbat to really get us in, right? It feels like, where are we? What's happening? But I think we're firmly in now. And I want to begin my drash this evening from two different access points. One that's a little lighthearted and one that's a little bit more serious. So I'll give you the lighthearted one first. Because, forgive me, but I think I must talk about Taylor Swift. So first of all, again, forgive me because I am not a Swiftie, okay? If you are a Swiftie, I love her. I think she's wonderful and amazing. I like her music. I think she's a great lyricist, but I'm not a diehard Swiftie fan. So if I say something that feels not right to you, please, I'm asking for forgiveness in advance. But hopefully you'll hear my love and respect for her within my words. So, even though she just released the Tortured Poets Department this past week, or maybe 2 weeks ago at this point, I'm actually thinking of her this week because a few months ago she became sort of my obsession. Around the time of the Super Bowl, for those who may or may not know, I assume most people know, but some might be living under a rock, that Taylor Swift, arguably the greatest pop star in the world, started dating Travis Kelce, who is a football player on the Kansas City Chiefs, which is the team that went on to win the Super Bowl. So can't really script like a greater romantic comedy or romantic story for our time. Greatest pop star, one of the greatest football players, or at least on the winningest team. And they were in the limelight. It was like a romance novel come to life. And I was one of many that suddenly found myself a huge fan of both of them and sort of obsessively looked for videos of them dancing together and kissing and hugging, etc. Because I genuinely really loved it, and it brought me a lot of joy. But I began to ask myself, what is it about this relationship? Like, why them? Like, they're straight. What do I care? But what's so exciting? But I actually do think it's something specific. Taylor Swift has been known forever by her songs singing about heartbreak. And she recently had a very public breakup with her partner. This is pre-Travis Kelce. And she seems to, at least publicly on the internet, she seems to really date and hope and endure heartbreak in the public forum. And here she is, falling in love in public as well. And so unabashedly. And she truly seems to be genuinely in love, without qualifications. And beyond the fact that I find that uplifting and endearing, as I've said, I love love, so I'm also just rooting for her, I think there's something deeper at play here, which is why I and millions of others caught on to this relationship so quickly. And that is that I think in a world where we're all so bruised by constant grief, I think there is a crisis of hope going on. And I think it's so easy to go through hardship or heartbreak or disappointment and come away feeling like, okay, I should just pack it in. That's it for me. In that culture, I feel like there's something intoxicating and admirable about watching a public figure refuse to do that, to boldly declare that she actually still does have hope for love. Even after all she's endured, she has hope for herself and hope for the future. So that leads me to my more serious injection point into the drash I want to give tonight, which is that at one of my Sidarim this year, the table remarked how hard it is this year to say the final words of the Haggadah, B'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And I imagine we were not the only ones feeling that way, because it does feel really hard to imagine a next year where Jerusalem is a city where all people can have safety and security, and all people can feel welcomed to their holy places, and all people can feel at peace. So I want to dig into that a little bit further, that question of what is it that feels hard about saying those lines, and is there a way we can get to saying them with honesty, with earnestness? Because I think this feeling of hopelessness is connected to the larger feeling of hopelessness in the world. I think there's currently a crisis of being able to really tap in and feel hope. So let me first say, I get it. There are many reasons to feel hopeless right now. The news is extremely challenging to watch, and it feels like those in power do not have almost anyone's best interests at heart, no matter which way you turn. Horrible abortion decisions being made by the Supreme Court as we speak, it feels. Having to watch thousands of Gazans go hungry. Watching in horror as families of the hostages exceed 200 days without their loved ones. But what I want to caution us against is taking that feeling of hopelessness and saying that the best solution to it is to burn everything down. Or to say, well, it's so bad now, who cares if it gets worse? And I think the Seder is teaching us strongly that that is not the way forward. And this feeling of let's burn it all down is what I've heard from a number of young people who I've talked to recently, particularly about this upcoming election. They say they might not or will not vote for Joe Biden. And what I've heard from them is that the world is so messed up right now, we might as well let it all burn and see if we can pick up the wreckage. And if it's Trump that comes in and wins it, well, then let's just hope we survive the aftermath. So I think this is yet another sign that we're in a crisis of hope, and one I want to be very careful not to go towards. Again, I understand the impulse, but I don't want to discount hope so strongly that the next best solution becomes watching the world go up in flames and shrugging our shoulders in response. When we tell the story of the Exodus during our Passover Seders, we typically end at the parting of the Red Sea, and the Israelites joyfully dancing and singing to the other side. However, Chol HaMoed, the intermediary days of Pesach that we're in, reminds us not to forget the rest of the story. The promised land was not immediately on the other side. There is still a long walk and long journey ahead. Tomorrow on Shabbat morning, we will read part of the rest of the story, the part after Moses goes back up Har Sinai and asks God to forgive the people of Israel for the sin of the golden calf. God says, I would like to start anew. I would like to literally burn everything down and start over. And Moses argues on our behalf and says, you can't do that. You don't get to begin the world anew every time there is an imperfection in the system. Instead, God will now join us on the long path towards the promised land, towards Jerusalem, and towards Israel. The Torah speaks about Israel as a land flowing with milk and honey. And right now I'm going to challenge us to stretch ourselves a little bit. So go with me here a little bit. Come up to me afterwards if this feels too challenging for you. I'm willing to engage in conversation. But I want to, for a second, to imagine the word Zionism as not connected to the current state of Israel. I want us to instead try and stretch our minds and allow ourselves to be in the minds of the Israelites, who are post-Sinai and post the crossing of the sea, hoping for a Zion, for Tzion, as a land of milk and honey. It's connected to the land, but it's also connected to something that I would describe as more like hope. For hundreds of years before the state of Israel existed, Zionism was a state of longing and clinging to a hope that one day there could be a more perfect world where Jews could feel safe. And that same longing exists today for a more perfect world where everyone can feel safe. When I think of yearning for Jerusalem right now, this is what I imagine: a state of longing and commitment to bringing in a world that more closely resembles a world that we can imagine is flowing with milk and honey. Many modern Sederim now have a spot for 2 cups on their Seder table. The traditional Elijah's cup, Kos Eliyahu, and nowadays some include Miriam's cup as well. Elijah's cup is meant to remind us that however much freedom we believe we have achieved now, there is still more work to do. There is still a greater freedom to come. We open the door and we call out, "Let all who are hungry come and eat." One of my favorite parts of the Passover Seder. It is in many ways a cup of hope for the future, even amidst a world that is currently broken. A future where all who are hungry can come and eat, a future where all those who are in need have the abundance and security to seek what they want. Miriam's cup, on the other hand, in some ways is the opposite. Introduced by feminists in the 1980s, Miriam's cup is meant to represent the miraculous mystical well that belonged to Miriam, which rolled alongside the Israelites as they journeyed through the desert. The well that magically kept the Israelites with water no matter where they went. If Elijah's cup represents the future, Miriam's cup is meant to represent the here and now, the way that we also must do the work to feed and nourish each other in the present. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot only subsist on hope. That will soon become untenable. However, likewise, you cannot look around at all the ways the world is broken and decide that everything will be okay if you give up and disregard what a future that is more broken looks like. I want to return to what I started this Drashah with, not about Taylor Swift, although if anybody wants to talk to me about Taylor Swift, I'm open, but about being able to sing at the end of the Seder, B'Shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim. I've offered one option towards what that can mean for me, to view Jerusalem as a word standing in for a more ideal and whole state of the world. But I want to add one more thing. The actual full version of that song is B'Shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim Habnuyah. Next year in a Jerusalem that is rebuilt. Not the current status quo, but a Jerusalem of the future. A Jerusalem that we will build together. Not by turning away from the imperfections or deeply problematic issues in the system, or by tearing everything to the ground, but by holding both Elijah's cup and Miriam's cup in our hands and saying, we can imagine a better world, and we also must nourish the one we have. And maybe to learn a little bit from Taylor Swift, who has been able to keep her hope among so much and endure so much heartbreak, we too can endure heartbreak and not let it break us. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Happy Passover.